Welcome to Current Affairs, the High Power podcast, where we deep dive into everything high power energy storage, looking at the big challenges that industries and governments and companies are taking on during this energy transition. We're recording from the offices of Skeleton here in Tallinn, where we work with customers around the world to solve such problems in high power energy storage. And if this topic is something of interest to you, then I hope you will subscribe where you're listening to this. Or if you experience such challenges in your industry or your company, or you're overcoming such challenges with high power energy storage, then it'd be great to hear from you. And maybe we can have you on the couch as well. So today we've got with us Rob West. He's the CEO and founder of Thunder Said Energy, which is a research consultancy trusted by over 300 energy companies, investment firms. And also, Rob is ranked or was ranked in the top three energy analysts on Wall Street. He's also a research associate at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, so he is a serious mind on the topic and well worth listening to. So, yeah, my first question is around the idea of why. Why have data centers suddenly become this topic at the forefront of some headlines on the lips of Nadella and Zuckerberg and Musk in terms of power? And well,
Yeah, it's amazing if you think back. I mean, when I started Thunder Energy 5 years ago, we were kind of living in this world where energy transition was the biggest topic.
hmm,
It was about how do we limit human energy consumption. I think the IEA even had a forecast that like the best we could do for human civilization was if we all made energy consumption go down globally by about 20% by 2050.
hmm,
And all out of nowhere last year, this completely new narrative emerged, which is basically give me infinite energy and infinite compute and I can solve all the problems in the world. And actually, there's this really active debate right now, which is, if you have those things, can you deliver better human outcomes,
yeah,
both for people and for climate, than if you went into the let's thrift energy and get it all down? So, the world has changed in some very big ways. We've now got huge power grid bottlenecks. And I think this idea of infinite energy and infinite compute being the recipe for human prosperity has really
solving
captured a
all our
lot of
problems.
imaginations. Mm.
Well, maybe if we get there, we can. It'll be a get worse before it gets better situation, and AI will start to unlock some efficiencies that we've never come across before. But why is it because of AI specifically, or was it growing before the AI trend came? This data centers being this huge draw on the grid.
Yeah, I think this issue's been brewing for a while.
Hmm.
I mean, all the while in my numbers, if you think about like global power grid spending globally, it's been about $300 billion per year. Um, there's about 7 million circuit kilometers of transmission lines around the world, and just to get to net zero by 2050, that was going to have to treble.
Okay.
And just like to put that number in perspective, like the circumference of the Earth is 40,000 kilometers. So like that's a lot of cables.
Yeah.
Something like 15% of the world's aluminium and copper would need to go into just building those transmission lines. And every year we're getting further and further behind. So that $300 billion of transmission spending, that was going to have to become something like 2 trillion a year
Okay.
by 2050. And suddenly it was kind of clear to people who are looking at this that we were going to start getting bottlenecks in the grid. And I think AI was really the kind of proverbial straw that broke the
Okay.
camel's back,
Yeah.
which is that suddenly, um, electricity demand really started inflecting. Remember, it's been flat in the US for 15 years. It's been
Yeah.
going down in Europe since 2009. And suddenly, these markets are returning to growth in electricity demand. And you combine that with a lot of the other things like um, electrification of, well, adding wind and solar,
Hmm.
uh, electric vehicles, heat pumps. And then I think, AI just really came in as this extra straw in a very big way. And that's why it's on everybody's mind.
It's interesting that we were staying flat for so long, and it's the energy transition. It makes sense that was going to cause a spike,
Well, it's
despite
the
the opposite kind of being the goal, really.
yeah. I mean, I think the reason it's been flat for so long, if you sort of break it down, has been the combined impact of more demand for energy use,
Hmm.
but increasing efficiency of that energy use. Like, it's amazing.
Okay.
If you look at
Yeah.
fridges going back to like the
Yeah.
1980s, the efficiency of like the fridge in an like, average house has about trebled. And you can actually, you can actually see that in the
Yeah.
like, if you're really nerdy and you go and look at like the efficiency of fridges and build data files and that sort of thing. Um, but as a result, people don't just refrigerate like this tiny corner of their kitchen. I mean, people live in places where basically they're refrigerating their entire living space, and you see that in the data as
Yeah.
well. So there's more demand, but it gets more and more efficient, and that is part of this kind of economic trend that uh, was first articulated by the British economist William Stanley Jevans
Mhm.
in the 1860s. And it's called Jevans paradox. And the idea is that when you make things more efficient, you don't see demand going down like you'd
Mhm.
expect, see demand going up. Because as they get more efficient, people use more of it.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think has really come onto people's agendas when they think about AI, especially all the news around DeepSeek this
Yeah. Yeah.
year. And does that mean that we use less AI than we all thought? Or
No.
if you ask me, actually, it's just going to
You need
accelerate
more.
the
Well, this is
demand.
this is what I heard with DeepSeek coming out and the idea that it used so much less compute to get it trained and up and running. It meant that it would bring the costs down and the energy use down, and so it would spread faster. More people would use it. It's cheaper, and it would become more ubiquitous. So while the stock market was tanking because of DeepSeek, it was probably a telltale sign that things are going to start shooting up in a serious way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of underlying stuff there. I actually think the DeepSeek numbers that have been reported are deeply
Oh
misleading.
yes, very much so.
um, and the amount of compute that's gone into them
Hmm.
uh, is probably 5 to 10 times higher than has been
Yeah.
kind of publicly stated by the company, and we talk about like the evidence for that. But I think the thing that really interests me about it is I'm fascinated by how industrial companies are going to use AI. Like, there's this idea that, oh, we're all going to be able to like generate cat videos and like have a friend to tell us jokes while we're on the toilet. But um, the real upside of AI is what you can do with it industrially,
Mm.
which is why I actually think getting AI right and being able to build it is like the number one national security priority for every country in the world. And I got some
It's
examples about that.
but it's
That
it's like the next race to build the bomb. It's very much whoever does it first and reaches it is gonna be be ahead in the game for a long time.
Yeah, and I think one example that I really like is around uh, aluminium. So aluminium, famously one of the hardest metals in the world to smelt.
Okay.
Like producing aluminium used to be about 2-3%
Hmm.
efficient, and it was so expensive that they capped the top of the Washington Monument with it. And Napoleon had like his cutlery made of aluminium, like as a symbol
Hmm.
of
Yes,
wealth and
wealth and power.
sophistication. And then they came up with the whole Haru process around 1900, and it's a completely different way of making aluminium. You don't smelt it, you electrowin it in
Mhm.
molten cryolite at 900 degrees centigrade, as you do.
Of course, yeah.
And suddenly it went from being like 2% efficient, it's now like 60% efficient to make
Mm.
aluminium. And it's so cheap that you can like wrap your sandwiches in and stuff. And that's kind of the value of being able to discover better process technologies or better ways of doing things. And I think that's going to be everywhere in technology. I mean, Larry Ellison gives that example of like you go in and you have your blood taken and they diagnose a specific cancer that has just in its very early
Mm.
stages, arisen in you, and then within a day develop a vaccine that is unique to you and like give you a vaccine to cure your cancer. And you sort of start thinking about those kind of game changing paradigm shifts from AI. And if you spend your life looking at technology, I can tell you they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
Absolutely, and this is something that you wrote in a note maybe a few months ago that the biggest kind of thing for AI in terms of power is it's going to be uptime, basically keeping these AI data centers up and running. And what you're describing, I'm a believer. So the more power we throw at these things, and the more money that we have to put into it, the more likely they're going to come out with the next best thing, and they will start to make themselves more efficient. But but then we come to the bottleneck of of the power that they need. And where, so we talked about how the AI data centers were the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of causing this real uptick in energy and power needs. Why, what's the grid struggling with? Or what are the current power supply issues that we're having that mean that it is a problem that everyone's talking about with AI data centers?
Yeah, I think you can start just with the numbers. I mean,
Good
if you think
place.
about global electricity demand, it's about 30,000 terawatt hours per year.
Mm.
I don't know, maybe put some context around that. That's equivalent to um, about half a kitchen toaster running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for every man, woman, and child on the planet. So it's quite a lot of electricity. And of that 30,000 terawatt hours, like everything to do with the internet today is about 800. So it's in
Yeah.
there. It's
Hmm.
about 2.5%.
Yeah, it's a chunk.
Fine. Um, but the kinds of numbers that we're looking at for the AI data centers that want to get built by 2030, it's another 1,000 terawatt hours. So it's 3% electricity demand growth,
Hmm.
which doesn't sound like very much, but commodity markets, energy markets, like 1% here or there, it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's the difference between $20 oil and $200 oil. Maybe not quite that much,
Yeah.
but in that ballpark. And so um, the second thing, other than the sheer volume, is that when these things come, they come in huge chunks.
Hmm.
Um, you have data centers now getting built. They're over 1 gigawatt.
I
So that's
saw
like,
again up to 2.5 gigawatts, or almost, yeah,
yeah.
immense.
I mean, this is like bigger than the grid of Estonia, right? This is uh, the output of the average large nuclear plant is
Mm,
like a gigawatt.
yeah.
So imagine you know you see a single giant nuclear plant with the giant concrete cooling towers, and it's just like there is a computer consuming
All of
all of
that.
that, and that's one of these things. And so um, if you plonk one of those things down on the grid and just fire it up, everybody else's lights go out. And so you need to build new generation, you need to
Mm.
build new transmission lines, new distribution lines, and just the time for all that stuff. It's
So
10
it's
years.
not even just the generation, it's also the infrastructure that connects that to the grid and to the data
Yeah.
centers that also adds complexity and time, and 10 years is the number I keep hearing.
Yeah. So if you want to like go to the grid and connect up your several hundred megawatt data
Mm.
center, that's where you end up. And I think that's the reason that a lot of people in this space who are serious about building this stuff, they know it's a race.
Mhm.
You've got to build it before somebody else builds it. And the best way to do that is to self-power.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, how can you limit the amount of power that you need? So if you think about the peak power output of a data center when you run it with the most complex query you can possibly hit it with, right in the middle of it also being hammered with training loads and other
Yeah.
things going on, you can see a big spike in power. And if you say like, okay, so the peak power consumption of this thing is going to be um, a gigawatt, you got to out and build your own gigawatt of power.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, we talked about this before with some of the skeleton data center offerings. It's like, it's quite exciting if you can take that facility that has a gigawatt of peak power demand
Hmm.
and mean that it actually only needs 600 megawatts of total power demand because it can hit the peaks coming out of a supercapacitor for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why power electronics, it's $1 trillion market in order to help unleash this stuff and get it built quickly and reliably, and that's what everybody needs. And you
Yeah.
didn't pay me to say that. I said it on my own. Well, that's what
It's
my
but
research
this
has done.
is a peak shaving. This is the difference between the AI data centers and more traditional data centers. Is the traditional data centers, as I understand them, are just they're cruising along at a kind of a base load and everyone's happy. But with AI data centers using GPUs, they can do parallel compute, and as you described it, it can all those GPUs can operate simultaneously and cause these huge spikes that can be even for milliseconds. And the grid is on the back foot when a 120 megawatt spike comes through, and potentially cyclically, repeatedly. Um, so yeah, this is what we understand for part of the reason why AI data centers specifically are an additional challenge to simply to just more data centers. Um, so this is just one kind of the problem that we recognize, that we want to get these data centers up and running as fast as possible. And if it's taking 10 years to build the infrastructure and to build the power supply, whether that's a nuclear power plant or it's more gas, I know from your research that gas seems to be the number one energy supply solution for the big guys, the three biggest data centers to come on, AI data centers to come online, all seem to be pointing towards gas. These are the gigawatt to 2 gigawatt range.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if you add it up and you look at, it's not all the projects because there are so many of them, but
Yeah,
just
yeah.
40 of the biggest ones that got announced last year. The market kind of splits. There's the smaller projects that tend
Mhm.
to be, less than 200 megawatts, and those ones actually can connect to the grid, and then the
Mhm.
grid goes out and builds new generation and it all gets connected. But once you're above 200, 300 megawatts, yeah, they are tending to self-power. And of the ones that have been built or announced in the US and Europe, about two-thirds of them are self-powering with a combined cycle gas turbine,
Yeah, yeah.
and about one-third are self-powering with nuclear.
Nuclear.
I think the nuclear self-powering is done. You probably have used up all of the nuclear plants that could be switched back on
Mhm.
or had, a spare couple hundred megawatts that was uncontracted in
Mm.
capacity markets. And so, really from here, um, it is gas. And I think, uh, that creates questions in Europe because, um, well, we need a source of reliable round the clock power.
Mm.
Um, there is a desire to do it with renewables
Yeah, I do
because,
see Amazon and has become the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy
but it's a
sources.
bit naughty, right?
Yeah.
Because if you look at the power consumption of a data center, it's pretty constant, and then there are these spikes, and it's
Yeah.
pretty constant, and there are spikes. And if you look at the output from wind and solar, they're very volatile
Yeah.
outputs.
Nature.
Um, there's both second by second volatility, that passing cloud or gust of
Mhm.
wind, or there's season by season volatility
Yeah.
where it's just 50% less. I mean, look, we're in Tallinn, it's winter. I haven't seen the sun in like 4 days. And, I think that uh, just realistically, these things cost $20,000 a kilowatt to build. Building a gigawatt data center is like potentially a $20 billion investment.
Mm.
You want to run that thing hard because you want to sweat the asset.
Yeah.
And if you can only run it 30% of the time because it can only be powered when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, then it just makes it much harder to do it economically.
So at the moment, renewable energy sources aren't necessarily the solution. Well, they don't appear to be the solution if we look at the big
I mean,
guys,
where we have good renewable resources, we should be producing them. Um, but
but
there are
not
a lot of
used for data centers. Say, like, leave that to those that are can 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 handle that. But there are solutions for, say, creating more stable outputs from renewable energy sources, like East Statcoms with a new big thing
yeah, yeah,
coming in Europe.
yeah.
But
But that's exactly right. I mean, I think that uh, I think solar is particularly exciting. I think solar costs are going to halve again from
mm,
here,
mm,
and the question is how do you integrate the output of a solar asset into something you can actually use? And people in batteries, they always talk about, oh, it's about storing it up in the middle of the day and
mhm,
re-releasing it at night. And I actually don't think that's right. I actually think that the bigger challenge for really using solar, like really unleashing it, is smoothing out the millisecond by millisecond or second by second
yeah.
volatility in that output signal and turning it into something that is a smooth signal that can be used. So, I actually think one of the most interesting ways to really unleash solar is a combination of uh, capacitors and batteries.
Mhm.
And they both serve a slightly different purpose. They probably work in tandem.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's kind of cool. You can do models where like you can use 90% of the output of a 300 megawatt solar installation through a 100 megawatt grid connection because you can store it, smooth out the fluctuations and put it into a battery,
Mm,
at the right times. And
yeah.
that really helps with these
Nothing
grid
gets lost.
bottlenecks. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's needed in Europe for sure. And if we go if we go back to, say, when you talk about gas being the power source of data centers, we're talking about spinning mass kind of
Yeah.
solution
Yeah.
here. Will, even if, for example, and nuclear is also spinning mass,
Yeah.
right? So if Amazon or Google or whoever start building maybe small modular nuclear power plants, or take on existing ones, or they build new gas plants, gas powered plants, um, will they still have this challenge? Am I right in saying that if there's a massive spike with, say, when you're training an LLM and you have these huge kind of spikes temporarily, that a spinning mass still can't just ramp up
Yeah.
quickly for a second and
Yeah.
cover that? And this sounds like pointing towards us again, but just that we still need something to solve those huge spikes
Well, it's
in.
amazing. I mean, I've been in this space for 15 years, and it's like the more you learn, the stupider you feel. And um, I mean, I find the whole thing very humbling. Like my whole life, I've used electricity, like turn on the light switch and like let there be light. Um, and you can kind of live your whole life quite comfortably without really knowing just the magic of how it
Mhm.
works. And that every single generator that is locked into the grid is producing, a smooth sine wave of power. Um, and they're all at the exact same
Yeah,
frequency all the time. And if suddenly you have a little bit extra demand in the system, every single rotating generator that is locked into that exact same synchronized 50 hertz, 60 hertz cycle,
hmm,
depending on where you are,
yeah,
they will all slightly, slightly, slightly slow down. And that's where that extra energy comes from. And so you can get, maybe 0.5%, 1% kind of
mm,
extra energy just from that inertia
yeah,
that's in the big mass, those rotating turbines. But beyond that, um, this is where catastrophic grid failures come from. Is that
mm,
if you suddenly lose kind of more than that magnitude
mhm,
and you can't ramp it up in those microseconds or seconds, then um, stuff just is programmed to disconnect from the grid to protect itself.
yeah,
And that's where these kind of rolling, cascading
hmm,
blackouts in the past
yeah,
have
yeah,
come from. So as we have more um, volatile supplies
hmm,
like wind and solar coming into our mix, we're relying more on the big rotating generators to do the inertia. And that requires power electronics to um, square that circle and
hmm.
just keep the grid working
Well, that's where
smoothly.
the idea of virtual inertia comes
Well,
from.
yeah, I was trying not to go into like what is a statcom and how
Yeah,
does it work, because when you start talking about, yes, the voltage and the current have drifted out of phase, and so you're going to inject some capacitive reactance into the system to, it little starts sounding a bit Greek.
maybe.
But I am amazed. Like I talk to policymakers quite a lot,
This is going to be my
and
next question: is, are people addressing this? But go on. Yeah.
well, I mean, you talk to some of these guys. I don't want to sort of sound accusational, but you talk about inertia, and they think it's a Marvel Comics character. And so, actually, we have a problem, which is energy literacy
Hmm.
of people who set the agenda, of energy. They know kind of what is going to sound good in terms of like point scoring amongst their political fan base. But like seriously, if you left the grid to some of these people, the lights would go out.
Well, this is a topic that's AI is so big. Everyone's talking about AI, and so governments start talking about AI. And if they want votes, they start saying how we're going to be the next leader in AI. These smaller countries, and I listen to these countries talking about it. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure you understand what needs to be in place before you can take that kind of thing on. For example, Ireland is,
Yeah,
it's a lot of data centers in Ireland, and I don't know how up to date this is, but I've heard that Ireland can't take another data center. But at the same time, they are also speaking about how we want to be a leader in AI, which is a great goal to have. But we're talking about 10 years to build the infrastructure to take on one more, because the Irish grid is already struggling. We get the little rolling blackouts at Christmas most years.
right.
Um, so it's I think, and so maybe the answer to my question is, are you hearing people proposing solutions to this, or is it still a little bit over people's heads to understand the challenge that's there in terms of simply powering
I mean, I think
AI?
one of the challenges that there is just the need for pragmatism.
Mm,
And maybe that's true across the board with our energy policy in Europe. There is a desire for energy that is free and available tomorrow and zero carbon and
mhm.
requires not building any infrastructure and completely geopolitically secure.
Sounds
And,
wonderful.
where is this magic mystery unicorn? And it sort of doesn't exist.
Mm,
And I think when your magic mystery unicorn doesn't exist, you kind of end up having to pick something that does exist. And I think that who wins this race is going to effectively come down to who's fastest.
mhm.
So speed is really becoming the biggest thing. And
When you say
that's,
speed and who's fastest in building the infrastructure and laying the groundwork, is that what you mean, or who's fastest?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I mean. So
Okay.
I think if you wanted to do AI quickly, um, you know, and if I ran a business whose entire business was betting on what's going to happen and helping people figure that out, I would bet that the majority of it was going to be built where you can build power
Mhm.
quickly.
Well,
And that's why, it's going up in shale basins in the United
I was about to say,
States.
yeah, in the desert, yeah, exactly what I was reading, that
I
it's
mean, I really think,
so you say they're building on shale basins, the idea being that the data center will be there, and there will also be getting the fuel source out of the ground, refining it, turning it into electricity and powering the grid all in one place that no doubt has to be quite significant in size.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. In Europe, we could do it.
Mhm.
Um, but I think if you really wanted to do it in Europe and you were serious about it, you got a really tough question, which is, um, where are you going to compromise?
Mhm.
So one of the things I don't really get about Europe's industrial policy, and I don't get myself in trouble here, is there's this desire on the one hand to make everything as green as possible,
Mhm.
and there's this desire on the other hand to be competitive. And I focused on the energy transition for 5 years at Thunderset Energy. Um, we would love it if those Venn diagram pieces overlapped.
Mhm.
And there are some areas where they do overlap. I actually think supercapacitors, nice part of the Venn diagram where it does overlap. But most of the time, it doesn't overlap.
Mhm.
Most of the time, there's a great technology to help decarbonize cement, but inherently, like, it adds a cost, it adds an energy penalty, it adds complexity, and it makes your cement less competitive than
Yeah.
stuff that is made in North Africa or Russia or wherever and brought in. And we've got a competitiveness problem that is becoming bigger than our climate problem.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because, you know, I mean, I've had a roadmap to net zero that I've been developing and working on and putting all the technologies on a cost curve for 5 years. But I don't think we're going to get that. I think we're in a world where, if we're lucky, we're going to get down from about 55 billion tons a year of CO2 today to about 30 billion tons a year in 2050. And it's not really us
Mhm.
that's failing to decarbonize. Like, I mean, China in 2018, the kind of view was that China was going this coal demand had peaked. It was at 3.8
Yeah.
billion tons a year. And the IEA's view is that was it, and it was going to start going down and down and down. And in every single year of the last 6 years, they revised it up. And
Yeah.
last year, remember the peak was meant to be 3.8 billion tons a year.
Mm.
Last year, it's almost 5 billion tons a year
Mm.
of coal in China. And so I'm not saying, oh, climate doesn't matter. I'm just saying some problems in the world, um, you can throw trillions of dollars at them, and the only result you're going to have is that people who didn't throw that money and threw it at something else then go and have a unilateral meeting to decide the future of your continent, and you're not invited.
Yeah.
And we have to deal with that problem if we're going to be safe and secure. So, really, to have a environment to protect, we have to first be able to
Yeah.
have, like, a region that we can protect. And I think competitiveness is kind of coming onto the agenda as a part of that. And sorry, I've been very long-winded and probably drifted off topic here, but I think, as somebody has to predict, you don't really help people if you predict things that, like,
Sounds nice.
they already expect.
Mhm.
My prediction, is that within the next 5 years, you'll see Germany turn back on its coal and its nuclear. You'll see,
Well, did we not just see? I know it might be able to easy to point to Trump, but it's
yeah,
the U.S. is realizing, or I'm sure maybe realized before in a different party that if they want to lead the world, they need cheap, easily accessible, high density fuel.
Well, I mean,
And
Europe and the US is such an interesting contrast.
hmm
If you go back to the time of Reagan or Bush, the US was importing 20 to 30% of its energy. And since that time, it's trebled oil production, it's doubled gas production, it's ramped up wind and solar, it's done the kind of all of the above
hmm
approach. And other than a tiny bit of enriched uranium, which still comes from Russia, the US is basically self-sufficient in energy
hmm
now. In Europe, it's completely the opposite. And if you go back to the late 1990s, we were 60% self-sufficient in energy. We now produce about 40% of our energy
it's gone the
over
wrong
here.
direction.
We've fallen off a cliff. No other region in the world looks so bad on those charts. And so, just to wrap it up, I think we are going to see the realization that we need to get competitive and
hmm
be able to actually do the AI, but also do it in the most efficient way we can.
Well, this is what I was going to try and pull it all back together, and is that in order to lead the world in AI, for example, starting with the idea of the AI data centers, cheap cheap fuel and high density fuel, but because of that, we need to be making the best efforts we can to make that use of like the what it's like the use it in the most efficient way we possibly can, and where we can bring in renewable energies, make it an efficient use.
Well, there's a positive there as well,
Yeah.
right? And so, this is why I think you can be excited both about the energy supply within AI, but also the energy consequences of AI.
hmm
Today, our grids are dumb. If you have a temporary imbalance in your electricity system and you don't know what load to cut, the answer is you get your rolling blackouts
hmm
because the grid doesn't know whether that load coming out of that plug is a hot tub or a life support machine. And
Yeah.
effectively, where I think we're going, and there are some interesting companies in this space, is as our grids get smarter,
hmm
you can shift the loads. You can prioritize which loads become flexible and
mm
kick in when there's wind in the system or kick in when there's solar. And I think you can get an extra 20% wind and solar into our energy system through making it smarter and actually using the AI. Um,
Yeah.
and that kind of feeds on itself and becomes one of these reasons that getting this right is so important.
Yeah, I think that the what will come out of AI in terms of making itself more efficient, but making everything around it more efficient. The best example that brings me hope on that front is the is it move 37 in that game of Go,
Oh, yeah,
where
go on.
AlphaGo beat the world champion.
Right,
That move kind of um, unveiled a strategy that no human had ever
right.
seen before.
Mm.
And so it gives the idea that AI can come up with new and novel ideas that humans, despite playing Go for thousands of years, and a lot of humans doing that, never came up with that approach. And so if you point AI at not just things that are obvious to us now, like a smart grid that we can move loads around, but point it at anything.
Well, that's a great note to end on. I
Mhm.
mean, um, recent piece of work that I did, I just went through, there's been about 10,000 patents
Mhm.
filed around using AI across
Okay.
industrial companies. 65% of companies are doing it,
hmm
and 15% of companies have filed in the hundreds to thousands of patents. And my take from reviewing this stuff is that you actually just don't know the amazing complexity of problems like on the minds of industrial companies until you see them,
mm
right? So I mean, I remember there was one patent which is like there's a company Krones, a German company,
hmm
um, unfortunately named, but they put labels on plastic bottles. Like that is their business.
Yeah,
They
got to be
can
done.
do like 30,000 plastic bottles labels in an hour, and it turns out like with a bottling plant like that, if you like your glue is a bit too sticky or your labeling machine gets misaligned,
Mm.
within an hour you've created a really big problem, which is like somebody has to go and clean up.
Yeah,
And you see a patent for like an AI enabled bottling
labeler.
plant that has sensors in the glue, um, machine vision to
Yeah.
like check the alignment, like all of this stuff in real time. And I just like you could live your whole life and never know that somewhere, oh yeah, somebody does put a label on every bottle that you buy, and you can make that process more efficient. And you see the same thing when you look at how do you load iron ore tanker which carries 200,000 tons of iron ore across an ocean? Or how do you um, steer a drone? Or
Mm.
how do you drive an autonomous
As
vehicle
they
from
say,
one side of
driving
a
it.
city to
Yeah,
another,
yeah.
um, through to designing an entire I don't know, entire oil well. You upload a bunch of geological data into a
Mhm.
folder and then generate the drilling plan and take what used to take, 10 engineers, like a couple of weeks,
Yeah,
and do it in 2 minutes.
and have a more efficient path
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
oil.
right. So I just think, as somebody who gets excited by ways of improving real companies, real technologies, and how they work, um, we're just at the very beginning of something that's going to be transformational, and to the victor, the spoils,
Indeed.
and that's why we want to enable it.
Yeah. All right. With that said, thank you very much for coming on, and your encyclopedic memory and mind of these topics is a wonder to behold. It was great to talk with you. And if, as I said at the beginning, if you're interested in these kinds of topics, do subscribe, and there's more to come. And if you, like Rob, have insights into these industries, or you're working in companies that are resolving challenges like high power requirements, then give us a shout, and we'd love to have you on as well. We'll say goodbye. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks.